Hi, my name is Jack Norris. I am the Executive Director of Vegan Outreach. I'm also a registered dietitian. I went vegan in 1988. I did it because I found out how animals were treated on factory farms and how they died in slaughterhouses, and I did not want to support that. I'd always cared a lot about animals growing up. My family had a lot of pets. We had guinea pigs, dogs, many dogs and guinea pigs actually, and then gerbils, birds, and I was always very attached to them. I did not like to see people being mean to animals. And after my freshman year of college, I went on a fishing trip with my father and grandfather, and I was thinking on the way up, what is the difference between an animal and a human that would make us care so much about the suffering of humans, but that we don't care about the suffering of animals. Then when we went on this fishing trip, I was just disturbed by how we were treating the fish. I wanted to help the fish rather than let the fish die. And so that got me thinking a lot. I'd never heard of vegetarians really. I had been in college. I knew that there were vegetarians. That's probably the first time I'd ever heard of them. But I thought they just did it because they aesthetically didn't like meat. Back then, it was before the internet. There wasn't much information. Everyone tended to think you could not be healthy as a vegetarian without eating meat and dairy. I had a health teacher in high school who had said that with a tear in his eye, that if people didn't drink milk, they would get osteoporosis. So it took me a while to learn about the nutrition, that I could be healthy without eating animals. But once I did, which was specifically June of 1988, I had a chiropractor that told me that I could get calcium from greens, and plant foods have calcium, which I did not even know up until that point. So then I started becoming vegan right then. That's kind of the journey. I mean, it took about 7 months to go from vegetarian to vegan. I guess I did it relatively quickly. The first few weeks were tough. I didn't know what to eat for protein, and I wouldn't have even framed it that way. I was just very hungry. And then once I started eating more beans, I felt much more satisfied, and my cravings for animal products went away after a couple weeks. So I don't remember how I learned to eat beans, like why, but serendipitously I did, and I felt a lot better.
So that fishing trip, that was basically the beginning.
That was, I'd say, the biggest thing that started it. I also did I was in a record store sometime after that, and I saw a record album called Animal Liberation, which had been done by some alternative musicians to benefit PETA. And I had always gravitated towards protest rock from the 60s. And so I thought, oh, this seems like, and I cared about animals, so I thought, well, this album's probably right up my alley. I'll buy this and check it out. And then PETA had information, and that's actually where I started learning about how animals were treated, but there wasn't much about nutrition in what PETA sent, so I was still a little bit lost about how to be vegan at the time.
June 1988, was it just like one day you were just like?
Well, when the chiropractor told me I didn't need, because I was drinking like a small glass of milk a day to get calcium. And once the chiropractor told me that, I don't know that I started eating a lot of greens after that. I think I just kind of theoretically got permission to no longer have to drink the milk. You know, I was young. I was 22, I think. So.
How old were you when you were going on that fishing trip?
I would have been maybe 19.
Oh, okay.
I was probably 20, actually.
The seed was planted and you were vegan forward from that point, and then...
Then I was vegan in 1988, and then as soon as I stopped eating animal products, I thought, well, everyone else is eating animal products, and so all these horrible things are happening to animals. So I hooked up with some people that were animal activists in Cincinnati. They told me about Diet for New America, which had just come out. It was a book by John Robbins, who argued throughout the book that animal agriculture was bad for the environment and for animals and for human health. And so after reading that, I felt like there was a lot of good reasons for other people to become vegan, and so I started to try to promote it. And then I started to view animals differently, that they had rights, much like humans, and that people should not be harming them. It became more of a trying to protect animals from this exploitation that was being done to them. So that's kind of what started my animal activism. And then I just became more of an activist and eventually founded Vegan Outreach. It developed from there.
Did you have much support when you were evolving as an advocate in the beginning there?
I kind of roped some of my friends into being support. I did have support of the activists in Cincinnati, but I didn't know them well in the very beginning. I got to know them better once I graduated from college and went back and lived in Cincinnati for a few years. And then I became very active in the local community. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of support at the time just because it was such a new thing and there weren't that many people into it. So I was kind of, paving my own way through doing a lot of what I did.
Was there a lot of resistance?
Well, my family, I thought, at first I think, thought it was a little bizarre. I mean, in retrospect, of course, it was that someone suddenly doesn't eat all the foods that they're used to eating. But they've been very supportive, shortly after that. I think they took a while to get over the fact that I wasn't going to eat the regular meals. So one of my brothers was vegan a year after I was, and for animal reasons, and I didn't even realize that he had been considering it, and just one day he was. My mom and dad were very, they flirted with vegetarianism off and on over the years. I think it's tough socially for them to not eat animal products, because a lot of people see it as a rejection of their lifestyle. At least I think in my parents' generation, it's not as common, and it just seems weird to them. Yeah, I mean, I've been fine. I know so many vegans now. I mean, most of my life has been made up of other vegans, so I have to actually try to remember that the people we're persuading to go vegan typically don't have many vegans in their life to get support from, and so I try to be compassionate in that regard and not have too high of expectations of other people.
For you to endure this long, I mean, you had to be very committed.
Yeah, I'm very committed to not harming animals. I mean, for some reason, I don't know exactly why, but psychologically, I value animals' lives very highly. I've had companion animals that I have developed bonds with. I mean, many people do, especially with dogs and cats. But I've had bonds with other animals even. And I just see them as individuals that have a value. I mean, I value their lives, and I don't want them to suffer. And when I think of how, at any given moment, there's slaughterhouses where animals are terrified, they're in immense pain. They're also in factory farms in tiny little cages where they can't move, where they're in dark all the time almost. It's just, the situation is horrifying to even contemplate, and so I try not to think about it as much as I can. But I am as motivated as I can be to try to do something about it. Now, it's such a huge problem. I've set out to try to do what I can, along with thousands and thousands of other people, to have humans stop eating animals. I mean, that is a huge shift. I mean, that's something humans have done for eons. So we've made great progress in 30 years, in the 30 years that I've been 35 that I've been doing it. And so I'm optimistic by that. At the same time, more animals than ever are in factory farms right now, because despite all our efforts and that we've got millions of people that are vegan now in the United States, compared to like 500,000 when I first started. That was probably at the highest end of the estimate. There's more and more people all the time. The population is burgeoning,
but the CAFOs are just
CAFOs are exploding,
yeah.
And especially in other countries that have more recently adopted a high animal-based diet. So that is depressing, but I also think that there are signs of a lot of progress, more than necessarily than you could expect from a society to change in 30 years. So I am optimistic, but I try not to think about the fact that it isn't going to happen tomorrow. I look at it as a marathon, not a sprint. So we have to be sustainable with our activism. We have to think long-term.
What year did you start Vegan Outreach?
We started Vegan Outreach in 1993, me and a few others. The first thing that we did was we just took banners that said, "Stop eating animals," and we would stand by the side of busy intersections and hold them. People didn't really understand what we were saying. Like, to us, we were so involved in animal activism that it was obvious to us what we meant. But I don't think the public really got it. It was pretty hard to do, to just stand with a banner for hours on end, and it was extremely boring. Eventually, we created a booklet we could hand out to people, and we got enough money at the time. Funds were very limited, but we got, I think it was $1,200 to print 10,000 copies of this one-page flyer. It took us about a year to hand them out, but then we started getting more interest in what we were doing. We raised more money. We created an actual, I think it was a 12-page booklet. We were so frugal that our first version of our booklet was printed on yellow paper so that the printing process did not require a 4-color process. It only needed a 3-color process because the paper was yellow. It's so funny to think back on things like that. We discovered that colleges were where you could really hand out a lot of booklets because there's a lot of people walking around. There's people that are more interested generally than the rest of the population, than the older population. And so we started a program called Adopt a College. Well, first I toured the United States for 2 years, and I just went to college after college and handed out booklets, like 350 a day. That was usually the most I would hand out because that's what I could put in my case to carry onto campus. But then after I did it, we got more money, and by the early aughts, we were paying people to go around leafleting colleges. And so we had this massive program, and at its height, we were handing out booklets to over 1 million students a semester at over 1,000 colleges and some high schools, because sometimes you could catch high schools when they were letting out and hand out a lot of booklets at big high schools too. It became a pretty big program. After doing that for a long time, I decided that we needed to move from impressions, where we would just give people ideas, such as a booklet, to getting people more committed to changing. And so we changed from just handing out as many booklets as we could to actually trying to sign them up for our 10 Weeks to Vegan program, online program. And it's mostly just, it's an email series, but it has a companion Facebook group that people can join and ask questions, and we can provide support to them there. So that's what we started doing, is we started just trying to sign people up rather than push as many booklets as we can at college campuses. Once again, it was at college campuses. But then the pandemic hit, and we had to move everything online. We started running ads online, and we found that Facebook and Instagram ads were extremely successful at getting people to sign up for our 10 Weeks to Vegan. So I think in one recent year, we may have signed up over 400,000 people. Now we are going for much higher quality signups, so we have actually some barriers to entry that we did not originally have. Internet is like a magnitude less expensive to getting people to join 10 Weeks to Vegan. So we've kept that up, and we haven't gone back to going to college campuses after the pandemic because it's just too expensive.
What kind of reach are you getting now every week or so?
Every week we're getting between 4,000 and 5,000 people signing up for 10 Weeks to Vegan.
Wow. And do you have any stats on how far they go with that program? Like how many do finish it?
So our surveys ask people what they eat when they start, and then what they eat at the end, like 2 weeks after they end. And we measure it in 2 ways: diet frequency, which is how many animal products they report that they're eating at the end, and then what they consider themselves to be, whether it be vegetarian or vegan or one of the other categories. For the diet frequency, there's a change of 20 to 30% go from meat eater or lacto-vegetarian to either lacto-vegetarian or vegan. So anyone that goes from one to the next is considered a conversion. And so that's a pretty decent, I mean, compared to other interventions, it's huge for the things that have been tried to get people to go vegan or vegetarian. For what people consider themselves, it's a lot higher. It's generally from 20 to 40%. So it's as high, like 39% I think is the highest we found, but it's fairly consistent. Resurveyed people after 6 months to see how much recidivism there has been, and there actually wasn't a statistically significant amount of recidivism. after 6 months, which really surprised me. I would thought we'll be lucky to see any change after 6 months, but it was the opposite. Now that's the people who are willing to take the surveys. So not everyone will take the surveys, and so we don't know what's going on with the people who don't take the surveys. It's hard to get people to take surveys these days because everyone is being constantly asked to take surveys.
This 10-week thing, is it just like meal plans? Do you have dietitians?
It's meal ideas. We do have a dietitian, Matt Resigno, it's not me, who is on call. So it's in many different countries. We're in 53 countries.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of different languages. And even different character sets. So if a nutrition question arises, so we have moderators in all these countries that are on the Facebook groups. If a nutrition question arises, they translate it into English and they send it to Matt, and then Matt answers the question. They translate it back into their language.
And then what's the program like?
I mean, it's just an email once a week that talks about, we choose one animal product a week. So the first week is usually beef. It depends on the country. If the country doesn't eat much beef, then we wouldn't do it the first week. But most countries it's beef. And then it's pigs, and then it's dairy and eggs. And so we go through, and then some of them are not. One might be, I think 1 week is the environment. And then each one has a recipe. It has the food products available in their country. It has nutrition tips. And then it has reasons to be vegan for the animals. So each email has those basic 4 ideas. And then it gives, people other resources. We have a vegan mentorship program where people can get one-on-one help if they want an individual and we try to match them with people in their local areas to talk to.
Could this be for somebody who's just having difficulties?
Yeah, it can be, but we can't give medical advice. So it's
so if somebody has IBS or something, you just
yeah,
kind of send them to a doctor.
Matt or can answer questions on that maybe. We just can't be giving medical advice to people.
So what do you recommend if somebody is having difficulties that say the program for some reason isn't working?
I haven't come across this as much as you might think. Maybe because people don't tell us if it's not working for them. But I mean, I have a lot of, being a vegan nutritionist that tries to help people stay vegan, I do get people that write me occasionally with questions, and I'll tell them what makes the most sense to me. But if they've got a unique health issue, then I will tell them you should talk to your doctor about it. I'll try to figure out, is this nutrition related, or is it probably something else? If it's nutrition related, then I might have some ideas for them. But
and do you recommend people see somebody who practices lifestyle medicine, or is it okay just to kind of just talk to any old physician?
No, I usually refer them. I usually tell people to go to their physician, whatever. Some people don't want to see an allopathic physician, and so whoever their physician is, just someone that can diagnose their disease, because I can't be diagnosed. I'm not a doctor. I'm not legally allowed to diagnose disease. I wouldn't necessarily want to. You need to do lab tests and things like that.
Yeah. So now, you haven't mentioned VeganHealth.org really yet.
No, I became a dietitian in the late 90s because I had come across, when I did my college leafleting tours, I had come across a number of people, I would say one person a day, who told me they had tried to be vegetarian or vegan, but they didn't feel healthy, so they went back to eating meat. And so I didn't really have answers for them in a lot of cases. And so I thought, I just need to know a lot more about nutrition if I'm going to be making my life's work to promote veganism. And so I went back to school and got a dietetics degree, and then VeganHealth.org came out of that.
What year was that? That VeganHealth.org started?
It probably was late 90s, wow. I think. I don't know when we got the URL and set up the website and all that, but I can't remember not having it. So it must have been somewhere when I think it was before I graduated as a dietitian.
Was that kind of like the first site of its kind, do you think?
It might have been. Jenny Messina has a site similar where she has writings about the topics that are most common in vegan nutrition. I don't know when her site started and when I think it was It was after Vegan Health that she added the articles. But if you look for them, there might be a lot of sites, because every once in a while someone will write me and say, I've got this site, will you take a look at it and tell me if it's accurate? And usually I can't, because it's like, it would be like rewriting Vegan Health. And some of them I think are good, and some I don't think are accurate. I think some people, like, it's dangerous if you're not a trained, and I don't mean trained by, I mean if you're not trained in a accredited institution of higher learning in nutrition, it's hard. You just don't really know what you're doing when writing about nutrition. Now, I would say that we bash medical doctors a lot as not knowing anything about nutrition, and that they don't get nutrition. And that's true. They don't get a lot of nutrition education, but they do get a lot of biochemistry and physiology and things like that. And so someone who's a medical doctor that wants to read up on nutrition and read the scientific literature and doesn't go in with a preconceived idea of paleo or vegan can become, I think, just as well versed in nutrition as a dietitian can. But just your average activist, they shouldn't really be doing that.
How does somebody find somebody to get help? If they don't really trust their doctor, maybe their doctor's eating meat, eggs, and dairy typically, and they're saying, well, your problems are because you're not eating these.
Yeah, it is tough. If you have a doctor that is not open to veganism, then you're not probably going to get the best advice, and you will need to find someone else. And that isn't necessarily easy, especially for people in countries where few doctors are going to be interested in it. So it's not an easy situation necessarily. In the United States, you can generally find doctors that are fine with veganism.
There's a lot of health coaches that are coming out of the woodworks here. And I don't know that they're necessarily as thoroughly trained.
Right.
Should we have some caution when getting
I mean,
advice
I would.
from those people?
If you don't know what you're doing, like, you should not be telling people anything about medications if you are not a doctor, for one thing. That's really dangerous. And you shouldn't be telling people about what they should be doing to treat cancer, what they should be doing to treat their heart disease. You're flirting with danger when you do that. There's some programs to teach people how to promote plant-based diets, and so you go in, you get this quick rundown that every disease is caused by animal products, and then you're good to go, and that just isn't the truth. And it's way too simplified. And those people don't really understand all sorts of things. Like, there's a ton I don't understand about nutrition. People that know just a small percentage of what I know, it's like enough knowledge to be dangerous.
So veganhealth.org, I mean, it essentially covers every nutrient, essentially, right?
Every nutrient that is an issue in vegan diets that we know of. I mean, in which I think we pretty much know all of them, but.
So somebody could go there and find out about like B12 or iodine and calcium, and get a really thorough, unbiased perspective on these things, right?
So we have a page called Daily Needs, and that lists all the things that you need to be aware of if you go vegan. It's concise, it's short, it tells you what to do. And so I try to make it as uncomplicated as possible. Then if you want to know the research behind it and why we say what we do, then there's bigger, longer articles that explain it all. That's for the people very interested in details of nutrition.
I've referenced the B12 section of your site a bunch. It's just really fascinating, pretty thorough, you know.
Thank you.
And it's fun to share with people. So anybody listening to this, definitely go check out veganhealth.org and veganoutreach.org.
Yes.
But definitely use that as a tool.
Yeah, veganoutreach.org, more for getting people to go vegan. And we also have a Vegan Chef Challenge program that we've really expanded since the pandemic ended in the last year. Well, Vegan Chef Challenge is where we go to a city. We try to target restaurants that are not vegetarian and vegan restaurants, though the vegetarian and vegan restaurants also take part. But we try to get restaurants that don't typically have vegan options to add vegan options. And they add it for a month. We promote the program. We've been getting a lot of great news coverage in the local cities.
Yeah, Yuri did Charlotte recently.
Yeah, Yuri did Charlotte. He's done a bunch. He's doing 7 this year, 7 different cities, so 1 per month for like 7 months in a row. But the coverage has been fantastic. In Amarillo, we've had 5 news segments on vegan eating in Amarillo, Texas. Like, this is not Berkeley, California. It creates such a positive buzz about veganism that we've been really excited about them. So we're trying to expand them to as many cities as we can. We have some are run by volunteers, but it's a decent amount of work. So if you want to run it, it's very satisfying, but it takes more than 2 hours to do. I mean, you're going to have to put in a few hours a week to do it. But we work with volunteers, and we have staff that also run them, like Yuri and Vic Flores and Jackie Va.
That's cool, man. So a lot of different pots. How do you say that? Pots on the fire?
Pans in the fire, I guess. What is it? There's another word. It's like a poker.
Yeah. So veganhealth.org, again, I want to go back there. You go over all these nutrients. You got what you need to do in a day kind of thing. And that's probably a good starting point for somebody wanting to check this out. Now, as far as getting in the weeds of nutrition, there's a lot there to learn. And overall, in short, if a person's eating beans, grains, fruits, veggies, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices, and a variety of each, what do they need to worry about outside of that?
Yeah. Vitamin B12 is the biggest one. You need to make sure you're getting a source of either foods that are fortified with B12 or, more commonly, taking a B12 supplement, either in a daily multivitamin of at least 5 micrograms a day. You can take B12 in a lot of different ways. Like, you can take a 1,000 micrograms. I think it's twice a week. I'd have to actually look at the exact.
Yeah, it's about 2,500 once a week or 2,000 twice a week.
Yeah, probably that sounds about right. We have it on the daily needs page. I take a daily multivitamin of 6 micrograms a day. That's how I get mine.
And so B12, now iodine, somebody was asking in the comment section recently about iodine.
Yeah, iodine is an issue with vegan diets because iodine is just it's not reliable in a lot of food sources. So someone could just be randomly eating and getting plenty of iodine, but you also might not be getting iodine because iodine in plant foods is based on how much iodine was in the soil that the plant was grown in. If the plant was grown in soil near a large body of water, there's a good chance it has iodine. But if it wasn't, then there's a good chance it doesn't have iodine. So it's very reliant on the region. Because of that, we recommend that vegans take either a multivitamin with iodine in it, which most multivitamins have. But if you don't do that, you should probably take an iodine supplement. Now, if you eat a lot of seaweed, which most vegans don't, but if you're someone who eats a lot of seaweed on a few times a week, then you probably don't need an iodine supplement. Or if you eat a lot of iodized salt, but we don't want to push salt on people because it's not great to eat a lot of salt. But if you if you like a lot of salt on your food and you're salting it, then use iodized salt. Now, if you go out of your way to eat sea salt, which natural sea salt that they sell in health food stores, that doesn't necessarily have iodine, even though you think it would, but it doesn't necessarily have it. So it has to be iodized salt. The container has to say iodized on it, or else there's not enough iodine to rely on.
So I use like kelp granules.
Yeah, kelp is probably just fine, but sometimes it has a lot of iodine.
That's why I use the granules, because it's just a little.
Yeah, I mean, even in a small amount, we recommend that you use potassium. No, we recommend you use potassium iodide, which would be in either an iodine supplement or a multivitamin. Sometimes they're kelp. Sometimes they're made out of kelp, but we would recommend not. There's also an issue with heavy metals being in kelp, especially arsenic. And so because we don't really know how much is in a lot of the kelp supplements, some kelp supplement companies say they test for it, but not all of them say that. Like, I wouldn't throw out your kelp supplement but I would probably not buy more. I would just go with potassium iodide as a source of iodine.
Now, what's interesting to me is iodine, B12, and quite a few other nutrients are in seaweeds that might solve a lot of these problems.
Well, I would not say that B12 is, because the B12 has not been shown to be active in most of the seaweeds where it's been detected, and that's because B12 is a molecule that shows up in assays that can be slightly different and not active for humans in some of these assays. It's a long, complicated story, but it is unfortunate in many ways because I wish it was just straightforward. To know if a food has B12 activity in humans, you need to take humans that are B12 deficient and give them that food and see if their B12 status improves. That's the best way, and that's rarely done because it's very expensive. I would not rely on anything until that's been done with it. Yeah, so supplements it's just so much easier.
As far as like seaweeds are concerned, B12 that's not active, can that interfere with absorption?
If you're taking a B12 supplement or fortified foods with B12, it's very doubtful that the seaweed's going to be any problem, even if it has the B12 inactive analogs. But if you're someone who never takes fortified B12 or supplements, and then you're eating a lot of seaweed, then the little B12 that you have stored in your body that you're relying on, enough of it could be blocked that it could cause a problem for you, because B12 circulates through your digestive tract. After you use B12, the liver, goes to your liver, and the liver puts it in bile, and it goes back in your digestive tract and is reabsorbed. If you only have really small amounts, then seaweed you're eating could be a problem for it. If you're taking a B12 supplement, then you're just getting way more B12 than the seaweed could have a problem for.
That's so good to know, because I've always wondered about that. And I want to increase my seaweed consumption. There's also fatty acids in chlorella, for example, right? I don't know if that's a sufficient
small
amount.
Amounts.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're talking about EPA and DHA, very, very small amounts.
Yeah, not enough to get excited about?
No.
Okay.
Unless they're concentrating it in a chlorella tablet, but artificially.
Would that be the other nutrient that people might be?
Well, my current thought on DHA and EPA is that vegans don't need to worry about it. It's a real complicated situation in that there has been some research that shows that people who supplement with DHA and EPA have a lower risk of, well, DHA I should say, not EPA, just DHA, preterm birth during a certain period of time in their pregnancy. Now, I don't think it's from a nutritional deficiency. I think it's probably because the DHA does some sort of a therapeutic effect for people who are already at risk for early birth. So that would be the only case where I would say you should be taking DHA, but there would be a case for everyone to take, like any vegan or not, to take DHA for that reason. Otherwise, I just don't think the evidence is there that vegans need DHA. There's research constantly coming out on DHA, and at what point, there's also a question of pharmacological doses versus nutrition deficiencies, and those are two different things. Like vitamin K2 is one of those things also, where clinical trials have shown that high doses of K2 are helpful for bone health, but they're doses that no one is getting in their diet. So even though vegans don't get much K2 in their diet, I don't think vegans need to supplement with K2, because for it to be enough to impact your bones, you have to be taking a supplement. You have to be taking well beyond what meat eaters are getting. That's just like taking a medicine. If your doctor thinks, well, you should be taking this medicine. Another example is EPA. EPA has been showed in one study, although there's been one contradictory study since then, but EPA was shown that at 4,000 milligrams per day, that it reduced cardiac events in a clinical trial called Reduce It. Well, that's a huge amount of EPA. And so suddenly, it's not like suddenly everyone on Earth has an EPA deficiency and everyone should be taking 4,000 milligrams a day of EPA. That's not the case. That's just a pharmaceutical dose. And if you are at risk for a cardiac event, then talk to your doctor about whether you should do that. But people should not be doing that as a preventative mechanism as a rule.
The controversy doesn't seem as much about heart health as it is brain health with that. So what are your thoughts on that?
I just don't think there's enough evidence that you need DHA for your brain health. I mean, DHA is an important fatty acid in the brain, for sure.
Yeah,
but your body can make DHA. And so you need to get enough omega-3s. You need to get alpha-linolenic acid.
Mm-hmm. And that's all the RDA is for.
Right, that's all the RDA is for, is alpha-linolenic acid. And I think that there's enzymes that convert DHA in the brain. If you're interested in omega-3 in this whole controversy, I have an article on omega-3s research that explains it all on veganhealth.org that you would find. I think anyone would find it very interesting if they are interested in the details about this.
Now, as far as the RDAs are concerned, some people criticize that maybe that's not the most dependable. Do you feel like the RDAs are?
I think they're generally very dependable. I think that there's been a few nutrients, choline especially, where I think they jumped the gun a bit on their recommendations. There just was not enough research to justify the recommendations. But for the most part, they do a thorough job. If you ever read their breakdown, like I've read a number of them, they are exhaustive, they're long, they look at tons of research. Like I try not to be my own national academies of science because it's just too difficult. There's like they have teams of people that do this, not on like every day, but when they put together the DRIs for a nutrient, they've got a lot of people, experts involved in it. And that isn't to say that they don't have some biases or make some mistakes, and sometimes they're just doing the best they can with limited information, though the information's gotten more and more over time, a lot better. For anyone to think that, oh, they just make this stuff up out of thin air, that isn't the way it happens.
Or influenced by lobbyists.
Yeah, generally. Now, the U.S. dietary guidelines, they're influenced by lobbyists. I mean, I don't even think that's controversial to say. Yeah. I mean, they just flat out are influenced. But that's not the same as the DRI. The DRI is a much more scientific, it's not a conspiracy against veganism. It's not, oh, we're going to promote B12 because animal ag tells us to promote B12. That's not at all how B12 recommendations are determined. They determine it based on people that don't have B12 and what their deficiency is and how much B12 it takes to prevent the deficiency, the overt, clearly problematic B12 deficiency.
Real quick, going back to what we were originally talking about in respect to things that vegans might need outside of a well-planned whole food plant-based diet.
Vitamin D. The DRI for vitamin D is 600 international units per day, and you can't get that from food, even fortified foods. They're saying that everyone needs to take a vitamin D supplement to get that much vitamin D. Now, few people probably are, but it might be a good idea to actually do that. Now, I take a multivitamin with that much vitamin D, so that's how I get it, but I live in Florida, so I get plenty of sun. I'm outdoors a lot. I get too much sun. Some people that think they get a lot of sun actually don't make enough vitamin D. And so really I recommend that everyone take the supplement. So that's another thing, but that's for everyone. That's for all meat eaters and vegetarians alike. During the aughts, there was a big, almost vitamin D panic because some research was coming out showing that autoimmune disease related to vitamin D deficiency, and a lot of that turned out not to actually be true, but for a lot of laboratories changed their reference levels to being much higher for vitamin D. The Institutes of Medicine never did, and they ended up looking at a lot of that research, and they later came out and said, no, there's no need to change. They did increase the DRI, but they said there's no need to change the healthy level of vitamin D in the blood. So actually, your average vegan has healthy vitamin D levels. I've also come across a lot of vegans who have extremely low levels, like they don't even register when they get it tested, and they're fatigued. And then when they take the vitamin D, the fatigue goes away and their D levels go back up. Now, by a lot, a handful, like 5 over the last 20 years. So that is something that I want to make sure that doesn't happen to people and that they know that why it might be happening. And I don't think, like, there's probably tons of meat eaters that's happened to as well. So it's not just like a vegan thing, but it is something I think it is nutrition related, and I want people, because vegans generally don't have a source of vitamin D other than sunshine.
And mushrooms.
And I mean, but you have to eat the UV treated mushrooms. You have to eat the special mushrooms, which if they are UV treated, they have a lot of vitamin D too. So that's a genuine source, but you're not going to randomly get them at the store. You have to seek them out.
Yeah. I get them at Ingles. It says it on the package.
Nice.
Yeah. And I think you only have to soak them in the sun, what, an hour? Or not even an hour?
I really don't know how you treat it, how to do it.
Vitamin D, iodine, and B12. Any other things outside of whole foods?
I mean, for most vegans, realistically, calcium is outside of whole foods because they're just not going to be eating enough greens, leafy green vegetables to get enough calcium. Like, you definitely can do it, but you have to eat a couple cups a day of kale or collard greens or turnip or mustard greens. Most vegans aren't doing that. They're not bothering to do it. You can't, it would be very hard to eat enough broccoli to get enough calcium.
I put a lot of kale in my smoothie, man.
All right, well, you might be set. You might be set, but most vegans are not. And studies have shown that most vegans aren't. There's also calcium set tofu. So most tofu is calcium set, not all of it. So you have to look on the package and see if it says calcium in one of the ingredients, calcium something. It's not calcium sulfate or something like that. I don't remember what is most common. In any case, if it says calcium on the ingredients, then you're fine, and there's a lot of calcium in it. But if it doesn't, then you're not getting the calcium from tofu. But if you eat a lot of tofu on a daily basis and it's calcium set, then that's enough calcium also. But other than that, calcium fortified orange juice or calcium fortified non-dairy milk is a way to get enough calcium, or a supplement. Yeah, that's something vegans need to pay attention to. I think that's probably the most important thing that vegans need to pay attention to, other than B12, is calcium. Because research has shown vegans to have slightly higher bone fracture risks.
And that could be for a variety of reasons.
Yes, it can be. Calcium seems to be part of it. It could also be vegans not getting enough vitamin A. Now, it's easy to get enough vitamin A with whole foods. You just have to eat carrots or butternut squash, sweet potatoes, orange vegetables, basically. Romaine, let's see. But you'd have to eat a lot of romaine.
I eat a whole head when I eat it.
Yeah, once again, Jeff, you're out of control on some of these vegetables. Spinach is very high of the greens. It doesn't look like any of the other greens are all that high. But so it's carrot juice is by far the best. Yeah. Pumpkin, carrots, raw, just raw carrots, sweet potatoes, butternut squash, and then cantaloupe actually is a fruit. And then you're dropping off. After that, romaine lettuce. Oh, you know what? A cup has 205 retinal activity equivalents, which is not bad. But you'd have to eat, so I don't know, 4 cups a head, I guess, would do it. You're right.
So vitamin A is not something you want to supplement. I've heard bad things about that, right?
Beta carotene, I mean, it increased the risk of lung cancer in one of the biggest studies that was done with beta carotene. But, that was a supplement. So from whole foods, that has not been it's probably the opposite. It's protective. I mean, I drink carrot juice almost every day, or I eat a lot of carrots. And it's good to add a source of fat with them because vitamin A is fat soluble, beta carotene is fat soluble. And so you absorb it better with fat. And so like I'll dip carrots in hummus or guacamole and eat a bunch. Baby carrots, I should say.
I'll put some walnuts on my sweet potato.
There you go. Nice. But that possibly is part of the explanation for the higher bone fracture rates in vegans, because some of them were not getting all that much vitamin A they just weren't, if you don't eat orange vegetables, you're not going to get it.
I never associated vitamin A with bones. Wow.
No, but yeah, it is. It is associated with it. So vitamin A has a lot of different things that it does in the body. Too much, if you actually supplement with too much vitamin A, you can hurt your bones. But that's preformed vitamin A. Oh. That's actual vitamin A, not beta carotene. Supplementing with beta carotene does not hurt bones. The reason I brought that up was that it is related to bones. Vitamin A and bones interact.
And impact exercise.
If you're trying to raise your bone mineral density, say you go to the doctor and they say your bone mineral density is low, that is probably the best, most reliable way to do it is impact exercise, either weight-bearing exercise, lifting weights, or jumping, something that involves jumping.
We've got making sure we get enough of certain whole foods to get enough of these nutrients, but outside of the whole foods, the iodine, the calcium, we might want to go there, but I've heard that calcium has some scary things going on when you supplement that.
Oh, at very high doses. If you are getting 1,400 or more milligrams of calcium a day, it possibly could contribute to calcification of the arteries. But less than 1,400, which following what we've recommended, no vegan's going to get close to 1,400. There's nothing really to worry about there.
What's a good range to shoot for, like?
I mean, I would shoot for the DRI or the RDA, which is
Like in a
1,000. Oh, in a supplement, probably 500 is all you need. 300 would be fine for most vegans too, because you are getting calcium from a lot of foods. It just isn't enough when you add it up over the day, unless you eat the foods I mentioned: kale, collards, calcium set tofu, or calcium fortified OJ, or non-dairy.
Almonds too, right?
Almonds have a small amount of calcium.
Okay. For some reason they come up sometimes.
Well, they do have calcium, but it's also not clear how much is absorbed from almonds, because I don't think that's been studied. And almonds do have phytic acid that can bind calcium. There's iron for some people. Generally, it's not a problem for men. For menstruating women, it can be more of a problem, especially if they're long distance runners, because when your foot strikes the ground, it can break red blood cells and cause iron leakage. I mean, I think it's crushing the red blood cells and then the iron leaks out of the red blood cells, and then it gets out of the blood somehow. It's not being delivered, I guess, to the cells that way.
We can get a significant boost of iron through orange.
In the digestive tract, vitamin C will bind with iron and become a much easier absorbed molecule. And then the iron will end up being used after it's absorbed. Adding vitamin C to meals through a small glass of orange juice or grapefruit juice, that's the easiest way. Also, avoiding well, it's polyphenols in tea and coffee. So avoiding tea and coffee at meals, so an hour before or after a meal. But that's for people who have iron issues. Wouldn't worry about it if you're someone who doesn't have a tendency towards anemia, who's never been diagnosed with anemia. But if you're a menstruating woman who has had problems with anemia, or anyone who has had problems with iron deficiency anemia, that's one way to increase iron absorption, is to not drink tea or coffee with meals. There's also zinc. If someone gets frequent colds or they get cracks in the side of their mouths, it could be due to low zinc absorption. And so just taking a modest, like a daily vitamin, multivitamin with zinc is one way. I actually take an extra zinc supplement on top of my daily multivitamin. Seems to me, it's hard to diagnose zinc deficiency. You can't just get zinc tested. It's very difficult to know. So I'm somewhat guessing, but I know that when I take zinc, I don't get cracks in the side of my mouth, and I don't get colds anywhere near like if I wasn't taking zinc. I'm kind of a believer in zinc for myself. That's just for me though. And then in some countries, selenium can be an issue because like iodine, it's very low in some soils. And then vegans should get a multivitamin with selenium in those countries.
What about like B6 or magnesium?
No, I don't think there's anything to worry about in vegan diets for either of those.
Or vitamin E, that was kind of hard for me when I was tracking my nutrients. So I
don't think there's anything to worry about. I mean, if you eat an extremely low-fat diet, maybe vitamin E could be an issue. But if you're just eating a regular, normal vegan diet, there shouldn't be any problem for vitamin E.
Now, as far as getting calcium from these foods, some of these foods come with things like oxalates that prevent the calcium, right?
Spinach is very high in oxalate. Yeah. Rhubarb and beet greens is very high in oxalate. So those are the main three foods. If someone gets calcium oxalate kidney stones, then you might want to even cut back a little more on oxalate. Usually it's a matter of increasing your fluids is a way to prevent future kidney stones. But someone who doesn't get calcium oxalate kidney stones, which is most of us, yeah, you don't have to worry about it too much, but it does mean that you can't get calcium from spinach. So spinach is a great source of iron, but it's not a good source of calcium, even though it's high in calcium, because there's too much oxalate, and the oxalate binds the calcium, and you don't absorb it.
I heard recently, Dr. Scharfenberg, I think is his name, he mentioned that if people, and he's just speaking generally, because people generally consume a lot of salt, if they cut their salt intake in half, it's like adding 500 milligrams of calcium to their diet.
I mean, I looked at the research on sodium and calcium, and I would be surprised if that much of an impact was made. I don't know for sure. I'd have to look at the research.
Yeah. I thought that was a fascinating idea. I did look into it a little bit, and I didn't really, not like you would, of course, but I did see if you don't get enough salt, it could be detrimental to your calcium if you get too much.
Yeah, I agree that salt definitely has an impact on calcium homeostasis, but to be that extreme, that really surprises me.
Yeah. I mean, as long as we're getting a proper variety, then we don't have to worry about oxalates, right?
No, I don't think that most people have to give oxalate a second thought.
It just comes up a lot in the comment sections, you know, and I don't know, I guess the opposition to what we're talking about, they bring up these anti-nutrients.
They bring up these little tiny things that don't really have much of an impact on things overall.
Like phytates you mentioned earlier, lectins, things like this, these aren't really things that we need to worry about.
No. The foods that are high in those are usually cooked foods.
Sprouted.
Yeah, that deactivate them to a large extent to where they're not that harmful. Harmful is a strong word, but they're not preventing nutrient absorption as much as it would in a raw food for sure. Like lectins in a raw food can be a disaster for your digestive system in a raw bean. But like you said, if you cook, I mean, we don't eat raw, don't eat raw beans, just my advice. Now, if you sprout them, I would sprout them well, especially if you find that you have digestive problems with not well sprouted. But I cook my beans and then it takes care of the lectins.
Yeah, and I've even heard that there's potentially some anti-cancer properties going on there.
I don't know. It's hard to measure that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, I think Greger mentions it, and there's some papers out there that talk about, I think it was both phytates and lectins.
I think I've heard that phytic acid is an antioxidant, so I would need to look that up to be absolutely sure.
Okay. Yeah. So anything you want to throw out there regarding these naysayers who keep mentioning these oxalates, tannins, sopanins, lectins, phytates, mycotoxins?
You know, anti-vegan people who bring up anti-nutrient stuff, they're really mostly an irrelevant thing. If you're eating only raw foods, then maybe they could have an impact on your nutrition status. But if you're eating a typical average vegan diet, they're not an issue except the ones that I've talked about. Like if you're relying on spinach for calcium, that doesn't work. But these are small cases. And
baby spinach has less, and cooking it, like you said, reduces it. So there's ways to even get around the spinach thing a little bit.
Yeah, oxalate comes out in the water when you cook a green, but it doesn't completely, so you still can't rely on cooked spinach for calcium.
You mentioned in another video I was watching, it's probably not a good idea to use the spinach leaves in a smoothie, for example, because it retains the water.
If you do green smoothies on a daily basis, one, the smoothie does have a lot of liquid to counteract the kidney stone impact of high oxalate. So whether it's doing more good or harm with regard to kidney stones, I think that's yet to be determined. But I would just use kale, not spinach, if you are daily smoothing, using a lot of leafy greens in a green smoothie. If it's just a little bit, if it's a handful of spinach, that's fine. But if you're doing a lot of spinach, like half a bag maybe of the pre-bagged spinach, I would do kale instead if it were me.
Yeah. What about goitrogens?
Goitrogens are, what they are is that molecules in uncooked foods, especially cruciferous vegetables, that can prevent iodine absorption. And so if you're eating a lot of raw broccoli, that could be a problem for your thyroid health, but it would have to be a lot.
What about kale though?
But when you cook it, I don't think kale has that many goitrogens raw. It's like Brussels sprouts, broccoli would be the big one. I'd have to look up what all the goitrogenic foods are.
I just, because we were talking about making a kale smoothie,
Yeah, most goitrogenic foods are cooked before you eat them. So if you're eating a ton of raw greens, make sure that you're not doing too many goitrogenic, it's easy to look up what they are.
So I think we've pretty much covered all of the anti-nutrient stuff. Is there anything else you want to throw out there in regard to that?
We covered most of the nutrients of any concern for your average vegan.
Iodine, calcium, B12.
There was iron, zinc.
Iron and zinc, yeah, cool.
Yep.
And is there a supplement, I don't know, you probably don't want to,
I don't have a problem.
Brand?
I think Diva has a multivitamin I use that I think is very good. I think it's called Tiny Tablets. It has the B12, the iodine, the vitamin D. That's probably what is mostly that I need, and it covers all of it.
Is that every day you take it?
I take it every day.
Could somebody just take it every other day and save a little money?
I would, if for B12, I wouldn't take it every other day.
Oh,
it doesn't have, it only has 6 micrograms, and you should get at least 5 micrograms a day. So yeah, I wouldn't. It's not that expensive. I mean, it really isn't very expensive.
Cool. Well, the fatty acids.
I have no connection with Diva. They won't even return my emails. So, but I think it's a good multivitamin.
What about Compliments? Have you heard of that one, that brand?
I don't think I've heard of that.
Oh.
I don't know a whole lot about
But Diva.
all the different brands.
Yeah, Diva's a good one then.
Yeah, Diva's the one I found, and I actually tested my B12 levels before and after 90 days of the Diva multivitamin, and my B12 stayed healthy. So it was kind of a test to see, is 5 micrograms really enough? It does have 6, not 5. There's not a big difference between the two. And so I was happy that, it seemed to be reliable.
As far as like B12, there's somebody about a year or two ago, they had really high levels of B12 and they got worried about it, and they did a video, and they were basically, I'm afraid that they might have scared people with this whole idea.
Yeah.
Is there anything to worry about there?
No, there's nothing to worry about with taking too much B12. Now, if your B12 levels are real high, you should try to rule out the diseases that are associated with high B12 levels. Kidney disease, liver disease, and certain cancers, among many other diseases actually, can increase B12 levels artificially high. So can taking a lot of B12 right before you take a B12 test. Like if you're taking massive amounts of B12 and then your B12 levels are really high, just stop doing that. But you should rule out any other issues. And there may not be any other issues. It may just be that you took too much B12. Like that's not going to cause any problem for you. Did it make sense?
Yeah. So in other words, it's not B12 that caused the problem.
It's another problem that caused the high B12.
Yeah. The DRIs. When I look at this and I track my nutrients on the chronometer, for example, I'm like, man, do I got to do this every day? Because some days I don't really want to eat that much. Some days I might only want to eat 1 meal. And there's no way I'm going to get near any of this.
No, the DRIs are just average for the population.
Yeah. So I average like over a span of a week, a month, or like how do I need to worry about like how much food I'm eating, or can I just eat until I'm satiated and then take this supplement?
Sure, if you take a daily multivitamin, then you're fine. The nutrients that are a concern on a daily basis, iodine is probably the biggest one, because your body doesn't really store iodine. So you need to have a source of iodine. You should probably have it every day.
But not too much all at once, you're saying?
Not too much all at once, because too much iodine can cause a problem with your thyroid as well. So you don't want to overdo iodine. I mean, you'd have to try to overdo it. Like eat more seaweed than most people in the United States are used to eating. It appears that people in places that eat a lot of seaweed, such as Japan, that they can habituate much higher doses of iodine than people in, say, the United States that typically don't eat a lot of iodine can. You get used to high iodine intakes, but you don't want to just one day go out and eat a lot of seaweed high in iodine, or take 5 times the upper limit of iodine, because it could cause some transitory thyroid issues. That's not relevant to most people. They're not going to do that.
Is that an upper limit?
The upper limit for iodine is 900 micrograms a day.
And that supplement has how much about?
I think 150.
So the adequate intake is?
The RDA for iodine is 150 micrograms a day.
Cool. The DRIs, I kind of have a better understanding, like it's an average of maybe a course of a week.
I mean, usually what they do, B12 is somewhat different, but for a lot of nutrients, what they do is they just look at populations and how much they're eating and what diseases might be associated with different levels. Then they determined estimated average requirement for the healthy population. And then they add a couple standard deviations to get the RDA to cover 97.5% of the population. And then that's what the RDA is. It's to cover 97.5%, or they actually have, I think, a range of 97.5 to 98% of the population.
I guess I get confused because it's like, wasn't it like recommended daily, or wasn't it like, it wasn't daily a part of the equation here?
It's always been recommended dietary allowance. The dietary reference intakes do refer to daily intakes. It doesn't mean though that if you don't take a certain amount every single day that there's going to be a problem. There's not.
Vitamin E, for example, like it was hard for me to get enough vitamin E when I was tracking it, but as long as I'm on average getting enough, so that means I have to get a whole lot on some days and not enough.
Well, and remember the RDA is for 97.5, 98% of the population, so you might not even need the estimated average requirement. You might need slightly below that. Now, that doesn't mean that you should aim for, like, how do you know if you're one of those people? I mean, if you're not having any health problems, like vitamin E isn't, it's not like calcium, where calcium can cause bone problems down the road. You don't want to be messing with it. If you have a severe deficiency of vitamin E, there's going to be overt symptoms, and then you're going to need to take vitamin E to cure those overt symptoms. But to my knowledge, like, there was a theory that vitamin E was real important back in the 90s, but I don't think that at this point anyone is concerned about long-term impacts of low vitamin E.
That was another one that was like, don't supplement that. It could be issues there because there's so many different versions of vitamin E.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on vitamin E. I haven't looked at vitamin E in years.
Yeah. So if somebody's getting a multivitamin and it has other stuff beyond what we're talking about here, the brand you're talking about, it's got exactly what we need, or is it got all this other stuff too? Is there a way to get...
It depends from nutrient to nutrient. Sometimes you can't take just in one dose everything you need of one nutrient per day because you don't absorb it. And the RDAs are based on food for the most part. And so people who eat food all day long are getting a certain nutrient multiple times. For example, calcium is very dependent on the dose. Like the higher the dose, the lower your absorption of the dose. Say your RDA is 1,000 milligrams. You can't just take a supplement of 1,000 milligrams and eat no other calcium the rest of the day. I mean, you wouldn't be able to do that anyway, but almost none. That wouldn't be enough because the RDA is based on people eating calcium throughout the day. So they're going to have a much higher absorption rate every time they eat it than someone's going to get just eating 1,000 milligrams. I think you're worrying about things more than necessary. But that isn't, it's not how it works. It's not like you can just take everything in one shot and then that's all you ever need per day.
Or that you have to get everything every day.
Or that you have to get everything. Yeah, it's more a matter of over time what your intake is on a regular basis. And that's pretty much how the DRIs are determined, is what people are getting on a regular basis and what their, at least short-term outcomes are. Like, no one's getting vitamin E deficiency who is getting an average of this amount of vitamin D every day. That's what they would look at.
Now, as far as what you just said about calcium, iron, I've heard the same thing. Like, you want to get a little bit in each meal rather than all at once.
Iron is also very dependent on the dose. The amount that's absorbed is dependent on the dose and what your iron status is. If your iron status is low, your body's going to absorb more iron. It ramps up the absorption mechanisms. If you have plenty of iron, then you're going to absorb less.
And this is non-heme?
This is non-heme for the most part, yeah.
As far as heme iron, though?
Heme iron is more regularly absorbed no matter how much you eat. There are diseases associated with high iron levels, high serum ferritin levels. I don't know the exact state of that research. It ebbs and flows, like as prospective studies show diseases and how much they're associated with high iron levels.
As far as last thing on this DRIs, how much of this, because we were talking about 97.5 or whatever the population, but that's not vegans or people on a whole food plant-based diet.
Yeah.
So how much of this even can we feel confident?
Most of it.
Applies?
I think we can feel confident most of it does.
Okay. Even if we're raised vegan from birth?
I think that there would be just small exceptions that we don't know yet if they exist. The work that I do is kind of preventing us from having vegans that don't get a certain nutrient. But it could be that people would adapt over, like for iron, it could be that people that are vegan would adapt higher iron absorption mechanisms over generations. So that might actually, who knows, that could happen. But it could be about B12. We could develop more conservative B12 systems in our body so we don't need as much B12. But I'm you know, I'm out promoting B12 to prevent that.
Yeah.
Because hopefully vegans are not adapting to lower B12. I want vegans to have plenty of B12. But certainly humans adapt to different nutrients in the environment. Not always well. I mean, you know, places that don't have iodine, everyone's got a goiter, you know, a big thyroid lump in their neck because of it. So that is the body adapting to low iodine intakes, but not in a way that you would want, not in a pleasant way.
I think we've reached a point where we could segue into raising children vegan. And that's something I get really excited about. So
okay.
I'm hoping maybe you got some input there. How do you feel about people raising their children vegan from conception?
As long as they look up what nutrients the kids need, I feel fine with it. I wouldn't do raw foods for kids. I think that kids need lower fiber food diets than adults. Their stomachs are not big enough to handle large amounts of fiber. So I recommend usually that, and not just me, but me and other dietitians, vegan dietitians recommend that if you are feeding a kid a vegan diet, make half their grain intake to be processed grains, not all whole grains. And again, I wouldn't do raw foods for kids.
I do know a handful of people that are raw and are doing amazing. They look amazing. They've been doing it for many, many decades. I even hear about vegan failures where they tried to go raw and they yo-yo diet. So it's like, maybe you got to be careful there, right? If you're trying to do that. There are certain vitamins that might get destroyed, like the water-soluble ones when you're cooking. But then it also, when you cook, it increases some nutrients there. So you want to talk about that a little bit maybe? Or do you get into the raw stuff at all? Or
I mean, not much. I don't see any reason to be raw. I can't explain the raw foodists who are thriving. I don't know how raw they actually are. My experience and the experiences that I've known of friends who have tried being raw, like 100% raw, is that it is not good. It is extremely difficult. You think of nothing but food and trying to get enough food. I lost a lot of muscle mass on a raw foods diet. Now I would not eat sprouted. I hated sprouted beans. I hated it. Sprouted grains I couldn't digest. So, you know, that's limiting if in terms of protein sources. So I was probably eating mostly fat and carbs and not a lot of protein. So I don't see any reason to be raw. Like, I don't think raw food has the idea that the food is living and that it will then give more life to you. I don't think there's any truth to that.
More enzymes.
The enzymes is basically not true.
Theoretical.
Yeah, it's not even theoretical, it's just not true.
Oh, wow.
I just don't see any point to it. The people who do it and love it and have glowing skin, more power to them. It's hard to know why your skin might be glowing. It's not necessarily because you're not eating any cooked food. You know, who knows why someone's skin might glow. Yeah, I think it's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. If you do it and you think, wow, this is amazing, I love this, I'm not having cravings, I'm not feeling terrible, I'm not tired, I'm not losing muscle mass. There's no reason not to be a raw foodist to my, you know, as far as I'm concerned, as long as you're getting all the nutrients you need. That's kind of my thoughts on raw foodism. My understanding, which is limited, is that the more recent raw foodists do not stick to 100%, they more like try to do 80%. I think that's a lot more attainable goal for people. Back when I did it, it was 100% or nothing. If you were a 99% raw foodist, you were failing. You know, and the reason you failed was because of the 1% of cooked food you ate. I mean, it was quite a cultish fad at the time.
Do you have a ratio that you strive for at all?
No, I don't strive for anything.
So raising children vegan, consider some processed foods as well as whole foods and cooked foods. Any other tips there? Definitely
read up articles by Reed Mangels on how to raise vegan children. She is probably the world's expert on nutrition for vegan children. And she's got articles, she's with the Vegetarian Resource Group. She also is with veganhealth.org. And so yeah, don't go into it not knowing what you're doing. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and we probably should say that to any parent trying to raise a child.
Possibly. I think it's easier not to just eat a standard American diet and not get into nutrient deficiencies. But that's the thing, the American food supply is tailored towards omnivores. Milk is fortified with vitamin D for omnivores, but vegans don't drink milk, so vitamin D becomes more of a problem. So it's easier to not get into nutrient deficiencies by winging it if you're a regular omnivore.
Yeah, makes sense. You mentioned Reed, and she's got a book.
She has many books.
Many books,
I'm not sure.
And you've written a book too, or two.
Vegan for Life. It does also cover raising kids.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, and is that a book that you still promote?
Oh, sure. It's Vegan for Life. It's on Amazon. I wrote it with Jenny Messina, who's another vegan dietitian.
And what kind of topics you cover in there?
Everything you need to know about vegan nutrition is in there.
Vegan for Life. Cool.
Yeah.
You've got your website. You're an RD. Do you work with people outside of doing vegan outreach? Do you work with people individually at all?
No, I don't. I just don't have time. Yeah. I wish I could, but I don't.
And if people want to find out more about you, they can just simply check out those two websites.
Those two websites.
There's a couple of people right now that are talking about the whole food plant-based doctors, and they're calling them purists, certain ones, because they're maybe one extreme is saying no oil, no fat, or whatever, or low fat. Or maybe another extreme is like too much fiber, like pushing too much fiber. How do you feel about like the low fat or the high fiber gurus out there? Are they creating more problems?
I mean, it's hard for me to say. I don't think that there's a reason for most people to be on an extremely low fat diet. I think for some people it could maybe help reduce their caloric intake if they're not eating fat, because oil is a highly concentrated food in terms of calories. So if someone has metabolic disease and they need to reduce their calories to just reduce the metabolic pressures on their body, that might be a way that they can do that. However, there's also an argument that fat helps you feel satiated and that you should start a meal out with some fat so that you which will lead to your stomach emptying slower and make you feel full sooner, and so you'll actually eat less calories if you have some fat. And I tend to think that people tend to seem to feel satisfied with a mixture of carbs, protein, and fat at each meal. Now, that's an individualistic thing, and some people might not. So I can see an argument there as to why you would want people to cut out the majority of oil from their diet if they're dealing with metabolic syndrome. Certainly that's not the case for, say, a vegan athlete who's extremely active. Then there's no need to cut back on fat. If someone who's healthy and active and not trying to counter metabolic syndrome. So, the populations that certain doctors might be working with are people with metabolic syndrome who have a totally different nutritional need than an active vegan who does not have metabolic syndrome. I think that there is a concern that when people suggest that people who have heart disease not follow the recommended treatment by their cardiologist, that they can become sick or die by not doing that. And so it's important to not just say go vegan and stop taking traditional treatments. I would err on the side of not foregoing traditional treatments. I would want to be extremely careful about doing something like that. Other than that, it's just hard to say. I mean, if you have a population, if you're working with patients and you're improving their lives through, it could be you're telling everyone eat a low-fat diet, and then a lot of your patients are getting better on a low-fat diet. Is it the low-fat part of it that's doing it? They're also eating just a lot healthier when they do that. It's not just that there's no fat or a lot less fat. So it's, without a study, you can't really say what's causing the improvement. The research that we have on studies is not convincing to me that everyone should be on a low-fat diet. Not even everyone, even that people with heart disease should be on a low-fat diet. The types of fat might matter. Like, you don't want to be on a high saturated fat diet with heart disease, but a high omega-6-ish diet might be just fine. Or monounsaturated fats is another fat, like olive oil.
And does it matter if that fat is cooked or not?
You don't want to oxidize the fat. How much damage is caused by oxidized fat, I'm not sure, but it's just, you don't want to do that. Cold pressed oils might be the way to go if you're at high risk. Like I don't want to burn oil when I cook with oil. I don't know how strong the research is regarding oxidized oil versus non-oxidized oil. I don't even know if there is a lot of research on that, and what the impacts are long-term for heart disease. But it just seems like a good idea to not oxidize your oil.
Yeah. So I guess if somebody wants to include oil, the healthiest way might be just adding a little to their salad or something.
What level of oil is a problem? I don't think we know that. I don't think we know. So there might be nothing for anyone to do.
If somebody wants to have a higher fat vegan diet, how could they increase the fat?
I mean, I wouldn't do I would avoid the saturated fat for the most part. No, not totally. Monounsaturated fats have been traditionally thought to be the healthiest fats. Now that's controversial. It could be that the polyunsaturated fats are just as healthy. I don't know, just eating higher fat foods would be fine. Adding olive oil, adding sesame oil, whatever oils you like, as long as they're not saturated.
I try to add a little bit of seeds or nuts to every meal.
Sure.
Is that a good idea?
Yes. It is. But if you have a doctor that is telling, if you are, you not being you, because I know you don't have a doctor telling you this, but if you are someone that has heart disease and has a doctor telling you, don't eat seeds and nuts at every meal, don't not follow that doctor's advice, because generally I think that's a great idea to add nuts and seeds. That's for your average person. Nuts and seeds are associated with low risks for heart disease, but you don't want to go against what your doctor recommends, because general nutrition recommendations would go against it. I would be careful with that.
One of the criticisms was one of the plant-based doctors that I interviewed said 600 milligrams of calcium a day is sufficient, kind of strive for.
I mean, I think at a minimum, you should go for the UK recommendations, which is 700 milligrams for adults. I would err more towards 1,000 milligrams, which is the US RDA.
My personal doctor, she's like, you're getting caught in the weeds here. Don't worry about it. Don't micromanage your nutrients. Is it necessary to micromanage our nutrients?
Probably not.
Yeah.
But you should get a plan and then try to follow the plan, but then you don't have to daily worry about it. No. The stress of worrying about it is possibly more harmful than any impact by having 700 milligrams versus 1,000 milligrams. But I still would set out with a plan of drink a glass of fortified orange juice every day with a meal. And as long as you do that most days, then you don't need to worry about it. Calcium after that.
And then the other thing was the fiber. The fiber, when, like, for example, Gregor talks about fiber, he might be citing something that says get so much insoluble and soluble fiber to the point where it's like you're about 60 grams or more, closer to 70 grams of fiber a day. If somebody's not used to eating fiber, that could be really hard to do, right?
Yeah.
And is it necessary to strive for that?
I don't think so. There's a certain amount of fiber that's been shown to be a healthy amount of fiber. I don't see that there's a need. I don't think there's convincing evidence that you need to go beyond that amount of fiber. There's all sorts of prospective studies that might associate a little bit more fiber with a little bit better outcomes. But to know that that is because of the fiber, I should say observational studies that follow people over time. That's what a prospective study is. A cohort study is another name for it. But these findings, these associations are usually pretty small. Like you might reduce a risk for something by 5% or 10%. There's no way to know if that's a causative factor, if the extra 10 grams of fiber is what did that or not. So I wouldn't get too worried about things like that. A vegan diet is going to have a lot of fiber. It's just, you're not going to have to worry about fiber on a vegan diet unless you've got some specific problem going on.
Are you familiar with things like Dr. Greger might be saying, or Bernard or Ornish? Are you kind of in that loop at all to hear what they're saying? Because I'm kind of curious.
Not much.
Some criticize them for saying, oh, you can reverse heart disease.
Reversing heart disease, it hasn't really been shown that vegan diet can reverse heart disease. So I'm definitely on the side that has not been proven to be the case. It has reduced cardiac events. The Ornish study did anyway, reduced cardiac events. It's not clear that it was mainly the vegan diet that did that, because there was a lot of aspects to the Ornish program. The claim that it reversed heart disease, I have seen cardiologists break down the fact that actually was not shown, and I thought they were very convincing. So I would not say that a vegan diet has been shown to reverse heart disease. I think there needs to be way more evidence for that to be true before we could say that, and I don't necessarily expect that there will be evidence of that. But whether it can help mitigate the problems with heart disease, a whole food plant-based diet, I think there's a good chance that that is true.
Okay, that's good to know. Could it be that some of these doctors might be setting us up for failure if they're saying it accomplishes something and then a vegan failed because they were consuming too much fiber and they got SIBO or irritable bowel? These doctors are making, some might say, an exaggerated claim to excite people in this direction. They're not prescribing individualized treatment plans. They're talking to the masses.
My sense is that they believe that a whole food plant-based diet is a much healthier diet for most people, and that that's what they're promoting. I don't see a problem with that. It would be specific individual claims. It would be telling people to not follow the guidance of their personal physician or cardiologist. That would be where I would start getting concerned. You know, I don't know that there's any evidence that high fiber diets are the cause of any problems. I mean, of course you can get too extreme. You could eat fiber till you know, I don't know. You could eat too much fiber, but you'd have to really work at it. I like to get my information from scientifically peer-reviewed published papers. That doesn't mean that every peer-reviewed published paper is correct by any means. You have to weigh the body of evidence, and I think that there are sometimes corrupting forces on peer-reviewed research, but nonetheless, that's where I like to get my information. So what some doctor's opinion is of something, it doesn't matter to me. Now I understand from a layperson's perspective, you got to figure out who do you believe, because you're not going to go read hundreds of papers. So I understand that is a problem, and I'm not going to say you should believe this person, or this person's always right, that person's always right, that person's always wrong. It's tough. I understand that. I mean, I think you can trust what we say on vegan health because we try to stick with what has been shown to be true, and where we don't know, we say we don't really know this, but this is what we think is the best thing. My goal is just for vegans to be as healthy as possible. I don't have any other agenda in the nutrition work I do. I don't say that a vegan diet is healthier than a non-vegan diet. I think that there are non-vegan diets that are very healthy, and it's not even that much of an issue to me about whether non-vegan diets are healthy or not. It's just, I just want vegans to be healthy. That's where I'm coming from. I mean, I think if you say you only need, like some people have said, some vegan nutritionists, whether they be MDs or not, have said that they have commonly said that the World Health Organization says that you only need 500 milligrams of calcium a day. Now that's been something that I think can be detrimental to vegans who take that to heart and stop worrying about calcium. One, the World Health Organization doesn't say that. I'm not sure where that comes from. I've looked into it numerous times. I can't find where the World Health Organization says that. Their recommendations for calcium are basically the US DRIs. So if you hear that, like that I think is a problem. Anyone who says that you don't need to worry about B12 or that you only need to take B12 every few years, that is also detrimental to vegans. But that's not the same as saying a vegan diet helps cure heart disease or something like that. And vegan diets have been shown to be fairly effective in treating type 2 diabetes. Now I know that's even somewhat controversial, but it seems like the research bears that out to me. And vegans seem to have much lower rates of type 2 diabetes. Now that's one thing that a vegan diet has such a difference that it's statistically remarkable. That is a disease I feel confident saying that the average vegan is going to have a lower risk of type 2 diabetes. And that's a big deal because type 2 diabetes is not fun. It's something you want to avoid.
If somebody's like dead set on like wanting evidence, what is the most compelling evidence that you've come across that eating a whole food plant-based diet is most ideal for optimum health span when it's well planned?
I would go to veganhealth.org. I have a page called Mortality and Cardiovascular Disease Rates of Vegetarians. And that article will basically show what the research has shown on free-living vegans who are on typical vegan diets and what advantages they might have or not. If you're interested in what the research that follows vegans has shown, that's probably the most comprehensive place that you're going to find for that information. What people would argue is that those are not only whole foods vegans, and that's true. There is research on people who are not necessarily vegan but eat high whole food plant-based dish diets compared to people who eat processed plant food-ish diets and compared to typical omnivore diets. And it does show that the people who eat the whole foods plant-based diets, again, I'm saying because they're not vegan diets, they do eat some animal products, that those are the healthiest, are the healthiest people in these studies. These are observational studies again, because you can't really, it's hard to put enough people on in a randomized controlled study. That would be the gold standard of evidence, but we can't really do that. It's not feasible. People would say, well, your heart disease risk is going to be a lot lower than the vegans in these studies if you are a whole food plant-based diet only. I mean, it's hard to know if that's true. You can't know it until you study it, and we only can extrapolate. I think a mostly whole foods plant-based diet is a very healthy way to eat, as long as you cover the nutrients I've talked about and you feel good on it. No vegan is suffering from severe protein deficiency, but I think that people can feel better with higher amounts of protein than some people can. I like to eat a lot of protein personally. I know other vegans who eat a lot of protein. And then there's other vegans who don't need much protein and they feel just fine. And some of the high protein foods are processed foods. I mean, is tofu a processed food or a whole food? I don't know. Depends on your definition.
Minimally.
It's in vegan meats, they're definitely processed foods, but I eat them because they're high in protein and they're satisfying. But also legumes, you can eat, there's a lot of legume products that are also high in protein. They're not quite as high, they're maybe even half as high as a processed vegan meat. Maybe even a third in some cases. Some processed vegan meats are very high in protein. So you asked me...
yeah, just what's the most compelling evidence?
The type 2 diabetes evidence is the most compelling for health advantages of a vegan diet.
Is there any compelling evidence that we need any animal in our diet at all?
There's maybe very rare people, like if you have allergies to most plant foods, there are people that at least think that they do. Well, then it's going to be hard. If you're allergic to every grain and every bean and every, and then a host of other vegetables, I don't know what you're going to eat. That could be very difficult. If you're someone who needs to be on if you really need to be on a ketogenic diet, a true ketogenic diet, you are going to be very limited in what you can eat to prevent epilepsy. Now, I haven't followed that research. I don't know if there are vegan epileptics that eat a ketogenic diet to prevent seizures, but these are rare cases.
Or just speaking more generally.
Not more generally. There's no need for animal products more generally, but you got to cover the bases that we've talked about.
Yeah. No evidence as long as we cover those bases.
Right. I mean, people are raised vegan from birth.
Exactly. Yeah. As far as these people that are having difficulties, have you had people come to you say, hey, I'm having difficulties, I don't think I can do this, and what kind of cases are those typically? Hard
to understand cases. A lot of it's fatigue. People are fatigued and they don't know why. I don't get a lot of people writing me these days about it, so maybe we've solved a lot of the problem. It could have been a lot of B12 deficiency in the early days of my work in vegan nutrition. Could have been vitamin D, but now I don't hear from people very often that they're trying to be vegan and they can't. A little bit, like maybe once every 2 months. There's no one thing that I can look at and say, well, this is it.
Have you come across anybody who's eating perfect and been like, man, I just can't do this?
The people that come to me say that they've tried all the way, and we talk about, hey, what did you do for B12? What did you do for calcium? Calcium is usually not an issue unless they're having broken bones or something, but I make sure that they cover everything. And sure, yeah, there's people that are doing all those things and they still don't feel good. They still are fatigued. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a diet. It could be, as people get older, you don't generally get healthier as you get older. Like each year is a new level of better health. You get sicker as you get older. Like things break down. If someone goes vegan and they're fine for 5 years and suddenly they're feeling like crap, it's not necessarily because they're vegan. It could be for other reasons. It could be because that they've done things. I don't want to blame them. I don't automatically think that because someone doesn't succeed at being vegan that the diet had nothing to do with it. They just did it wrong. Some vegans are going to get cancer, and some meat eaters are going to get cancer, and it has nothing to do with what they ate. It's just what happens as people get older. The research on vegans and cancer shows that vegans have a slightly lower risk of cancer. It's not enough to explain most cancer.
But couldn't the cancer have started prior to going vegan? that it takes many decades for cancer to progress to a point where.
Well, it really depends on the cancer. I think
Yeah.
I'm not an oncologist,
Yeah.
so to discuss that.
Could it be that a significant amount of these people having difficulties had pre-existing conditions that just weren't addressed properly, like even osteoporosis or anemia?
I wouldn't fall to that assumption. I think it's possible, but I wouldn't assume that that's the case.
I get the impression maybe you're saying, why assume anything? Because you don't know.
Well, especially the things that I think I don't know.
Yeah.
I would say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been around nutrition research enough to know that, like, the first thing that comes to your mind, or even the assumption that maybe is well thought out, isn't necessarily true. Nutrition epistemology is a tough subject. Causation is a tough subject to understand what can be proven through causation. I mean, how is causation proven and how isn't it? Like, there's a set of criteria, but it's not necessarily right, and it's not necessarily easy to fulfill. So yeah, we're dealing with a lot of statistical comparisons and probability theory. You know, nutrition has almost become, if you're not a statistician, which I'm not, and it makes it tough. When you do get into the weeds in that great detail, where you feel like you need to be a statistician, it does make me think, well, there may be nothing here, or else we wouldn't need to be parsing things in such detail. So like with smoking and cancer and lung cancer, the associations are so strong that you don't need a statistician to figure it out. I mean, you want to apply statistics, but it's obvious. Smoking increases people's risk for lung cancer.
So many times more.
Yeah, because it's so many times more that smokers get lung cancer. But to get right into the details and say, well, how many cigarettes a day causes it, and what is the mechanism, and to get into those details, then you're gonna have to bring in statisticians to try to figure that out.
And that could take centuries.
Oh yeah, it takes a long time. I mean, it's a lot. You know, you have to start following the vegans. They started following the vegans in Epic Oxford in the 90s. And if they started out not doing it right, we've got bogus info 20 years later.
Even with the Adventists, because a lot of them might have been ethical vegans that weren't really as health oriented, maybe, you know?
No, I actually don't. I think that's the case more for Epic Oxford than it would be for Seventh-day Adventists, because I don't think ethics were the motivational factor for Seventh-day Adventists. The Adventist health studies had a lot better outcomes than Epic.
Yeah. But I mean, even if they're health-oriented, conscious people, generally speaking, if somebody's a pescatarian, it seems like they would maybe be doing that more for health than somebody being a vegan.
Could be.
I think
that's well, yeah, and I think that's probably. I would be surprised if that was not true.
Yeah, yeah. So that might skew things a little bit, you know.
It can. Yeah, for sure.
So, and I mentioned that because there was one study that showed that pescatarians might have the edge on longevity.
Right. It's a very small difference.
And a lot of those studies are coming from data that's how many decades ago, when like you were first trying to educate people on B12.
Right. Yeah, a lot of those people probably, the B12 intakes of vegans in those cohort studies tends to be disappointingly low. Now, whether it's been well assessed or not, it could be a function of that they didn't survey the people well enough. But I'm still generally disappointed in how many vegans think about B12. It's too many for my tastes.
Yeah. You know, there was a raw vegan I interviewed. She's like, I don't take B12. She's 75. She's been raw vegan 50 years, you know. She might be getting it from somewhere. I don't know. I mean, it could be bacteria in her system that's making it, and it's getting in her I almost don't want to put that out there.
Digestive tract. I mean, it's not a healthy condition to have an overgrowth of bacteria into your small intestines, and you definitely don't want to rely on it. I mean, taking B12 supplements is so easy and so reliable. If your view of the world is that people were intended to be vegans because that would allow us to not harm animals, then I understand why you want it to be true that vegans don't need B12 supplements. But that is so far from the way I view the evolution of the human race. Like, I don't think there is any intended diet. I think there's just been accidental diets throughout our history, and we've eaten whatever we can eat that's convenient. And only recently have we decided, oh, I will eat that instead of that. Because before it was like, well, you'll eat whatever you can eat. There's no cognitive dissonance for me to think that humans don't evolve as vegans. I don't think they did. I don't think there was any reason for them to. I think it's caring about animals as deeply as some of us animal activists care about animals is a recent weird phenomena. I care a great deal about animals. My heart breaks for animals when I see them suffering. I don't think that's a good evolutionary strategy for survival. You know, I think that is a bad strategy for survival. So I don't quite understand why I am like that and why so many people I know are like that. But it's easy to explain to me that humans were not like that. Humans have barely been able to treat each other with any decency over the centuries or the millennia. You know, this is kind of a new thing that we care enough to not want to harm animals. So it doesn't bother me that humans didn't evolve as vegans. There was no reason for it. We're lucky that we can eat a vegan diet. I mean, I feel like it's been very unlucky for my activism that nutrition is a part of it. I don't like that nutrition has any impact on trying to help animals. It's been extremely inconvenient. But the fact that we can be vegans has been very convenient. I mean, if humans died if they didn't eat animals, that would be horrible. Yeah. So I'm just glad that we don't.
So do you feel like it's equivocally important, or at least right up there with the ethical component, the health component? Do you think it's like as important as the ethical component? It's a weird question.
I mean, I think a commitment to being vegan sure helps people's own view of how well the diet is working for them. A commitment to animals. I know a lot of people who've been vegan a long time, and most of them are doing it for the animals. Most of them are not struggling with it, to my knowledge. A vegan diet's been very good for me. I think that I'm healthier because of it, but I make sure that I cover my bases. But I think it's been easy for me to keep off weight gain as I've aged because I'm vegan. Now, you can do it as a meat eater. I know people that are thin as meat eaters as they age, but I think it's just been easy to do it as a vegan.
Yeah. The point of my question is, I get the impression sometimes vegans don't want as much emphasis on the health side as the ethics side because it's about the animals, not about us. But at the same time, I feel like it's quintessential to focus on health, because if it's not healthy, then we can't expect others to do it.
No, I think if it's unhealthy to be vegan, it's hard to expect others to do it, because humans just aren't going to be that altruistic to help animals. I mean, I wish they would be, and there are definitely some that are, but I agree. I mean, that's why I spend so much time trying to have, like, I get concerned when I see a study coming out showing vegans have lower health in any regard. I mean, most of the studies are positive, so I don't want to get people the impression that most aren't, but they are positive. But there's some, like the bone fracture rates of vegans, that's a big deal to me, because I don't want that to be happening, for one thing. I don't want anyone to be getting bone fractures that are because of their diet, because of a diet I'm promoting. And I don't want it to become the idea that vegan diets are unhealthy, or I don't want them to be unhealthy.
Here's the thing, the failure rate for diets is extremely high. I've seen numbers as high as 90-something%, you know.
Oh yeah. I mean, weight loss diets you're talking about.
Yeah, weight loss diet. So if somebody comes into veganism and with that,
right,
on the premise of that, they're very likely to fail. And that's the case with anything, any behavior change, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's why the vegans are like, really the best door to come in is the ethics, and then learn the health.
There's give and take on the door, because if you come in as for health reasons, say you watch one of the documentaries on health, you go vegan for a few months and you're fine, say it goes well for you, and then you start to think, well, why would we need to kill animals ever? Because suddenly there's no cognitive dissonance now. Now you can look at that animal ag and say, well, we don't need that. That's wrong. And then you can become more committed. So I see that aspect too. And a lot of activists have thought that is the only way humans will care about animals, is if they stop eating them first. So that's their tactic, their strategy. Whereas my strategy has been more, I want to promote the idea that to not harm animals, and then people are more committed and they stay with it longer. Mine is a harder sell, but in the long term, it pays off. Whereas promoting the health is an easier sell, but it just leads to a lot of recidivism. And with some few exceptions of people that go on and make the change and do well.
So you feel like there's likely far more recidivism when somebody goes into the diet, through the diet door.
Yes.
I think that's a good thing to get out there so people understand.
But here's the thing that I don't know. There's also an easier sell. If you get 100 people to go vegan to lose weight, and there's a fat shaming aspect to that too that is not popular in our movement, and that I'm sympathetic to. If you get 100 people to go vegan to lose weight, 20 of them stick with it. And then you try to get 100 people to go vegan for ethical reasons, and only 5 of them do it, well then the health worked.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works. I don't know what the truth is. But I do know why my motivations are to get people to go vegan, and so I do like to be honest about it. Like, if I could convert everyone to Jainism, they would all be vegetarian, but yet I'm not out on the street promoting Jainism because I don't believe in Jainism myself, and that would be very inauthentic. And I care more about the animals than I care about being authentic. So it could be actually more effective to be out on the street promoting Jainism as a way to help animals than to be promoting just animal ethics. But I don't do that because I'm not a follower of Jainism. It's not my religion. Now the people who are Jains, if they promote Jainism, that totally makes sense because that's what they believe, and so that's why they would try to get people to become Jains and then become vegetarian. So because I'm an animal rights motivated vegan, that's what I feel the most authentic in promoting. Now there's an argument that would say, well, why you're putting your authenticism ahead of the animals, and you shouldn't care about that. But because it's not clear what is the most effective way to help animals, I just as soon stick with being authentic, because that just is easy. It's not only easier for me cognitively, but it's just, I can be more persuasive to people if I'm telling them things I believe to be true. I think the arguments for going vegan for health reasons, they're okay, but like if I wasn't a vegan for animal rights reasons, would they be enough for me to go vegan? I don't know that they would be. I mean, I think that there would be some benefits, but there's a number of health things that I could do that I probably am not doing right now that, just aren't enough to motivate me.
Yeah, I like that. I appreciate what you're saying there. It sounds like you take an approach that probably emanates genuineness,
Yeah, right.
Yeah. As far as like transitioning, as a general rule, because it probably needs to be individualized, but if somebody's had a fairly healthy omnivorous diet and they just want to go hardcore into this, can they just overnight go into it, or do you recommend transitioning?
I would not recommend going slow. There is research that suggests that people who go slower stick with it longer, but that may just be more of a function of your average person taking more time to think about it, and not that going fast is a problem. So I definitely know people that become vegan overnight and they're vegan many years later. So I wouldn't say slow, you better slow down or you're not going to stick with it. I wouldn't say that. I would say that's fine. If you want to do it fast, do it fast. But if someone wants to do it slow, I think activists should be aware that that is not necessarily a problem, that they should expect that people are going to do it slow, and that actually if the average person that does it slower is going to stick with it. So because I know a lot of activists get upset if people go slow, that's a way to make them alleviate some of their anxiety surrounding people going slow.
And what might that look like, going slow?
Giving up red meat first. And unfortunately, that means you might eat more animals because you'll be eating chicken, which are much smaller animals, and that's a big point of contention in our movement. But it tends to be what humans do, is that they give up red meat, then they give up white meat, white poultry, then they give up fish, then they give up eggs, then they give up dairy. So that tends to be what they do. Now someone might be so affected by how dairy cows are treated that they give up dairy first. So they do it in a different order. But it isn't generally how people do it. Even people that hate the dairy industry, this is just anecdotal. I've observed that they often will give up red meat first. Like they'll go vegetarian first. They won't give up dairy first. So it just seems to be this natural pattern people follow. Like they get disgusted with animal agriculture and then they go through a pattern of how they give up animal products. So I don't get too bent out of shape when I see that. And like, well, wow, why would you give up beef first when you should be giving up milk first? You know, because I know that's just what people do. It's just how it happens. So they're starting off on their way of giving things up, and hopefully, then my job is to try to get them to get to the next step as soon as they can.
Now, if somebody's coming from a really unhealthy omnivorous diet and probably had like as low of a fiber intake as possible, should they be doing like maybe a spoonful a day until they can get progressively used to it, acclimate?
I don't think people need to worry about that. A person who's eating a really unhealthy standard American diet, they're generally not candidates to be going vegan very quickly. I mean, I don't want to be biased. Way. I just don't think that that's on the top of their mind. Someone who's just eating fast food for every meal, they generally are not having a lot of disposable income and ability to determine what they eat and at what rates they change to veganism. Now, there are some exceptions. There are some people that are in a bad financial situation and eating terrible that do care, and suddenly they find out, oh, they don't want to be hurting animals. And so should these people who are fairly exceptional care about the fiber intake? I doubt it. I doubt they need to worry about it. I think that if they are someone that is in financially hard situation and they care enough about animals to go vegan, they're probably going to deal with whatever fiber issues they have for the first couple weeks. But yeah, don't eat straight up Metamucil or something like that. I mean, you know, they're probably going to eat on the lower fiber. They're not probably going to go buy a bunch of kale.
Do you have an elevator pitch on how to embrace the healthiest foods? Mine is beans, greens, grains, fruits, veggies, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices, and a variety of each. That's kind of how I spit it out.
That sounds good. I don't really have one. I send people to Jenny Messina's food plate that is in Vegan for Life as a general idea of how to eat healthy. But yeah, a mixture of grains, beans, vegetables, fruit, nuts and seeds, or nuts or seeds. Nuts are the more important than the seeds. That would be a good basis of what to generally eat. I think you should mix carbs, protein, and fat at each meal. I think that's the most guaranteed to be satisfied for your average person. So try to mix things at meals. Mixing grains and beans is a good idea. It does complement the amino acids. Not that that's that important. It's a little bit important. But it does seem to provide satisfying meals for people.
You have a favorite quote?
Animals are individuals with a value independent of their usefulness to others. That was from a PETA postcard I got many years ago, and I don't think PETA promotes that anymore, so Vegan Outreach now promotes it. PETA's always been very good about not copywriting anything they do, but they don't say it anymore that I'm aware of, so Vegan Outreach actually says it quite a bit. I like to promote that on our social media a lot. Yep.
Awesome. And do you think we'll ever see a vegan world?
Yeah, I do think we will see a vegan world. I hope. I mean, I think that things are leading that way. I think that as new generations are born and old generations are replaced, they're going to not want to harm animals. I do think that we will get rid of factory farming and slaughterhouses. I mean, I would say in 100 years, I would be shocked if there's factory farms and slaughterhouses 100 years from now. But you never know. I mean, I am someone that does not want a dystopian future. I don't think things need to get worse before they get better. I do not like to see political turmoil. I don't like to see war. I don't like to see disaster. I don't think humans are evil for using consumer products. I think climate change is not a punishment against humans for being extravagant. I think it's just a really unfortunate thing, and I am very concerned about climate change and how it could set back the evolution of humanity's ethics. Assuming there is no massively dystopian future, I do think civilization does not take significant steps backwards. I think we will see the end of animal farming and slaughterhouses now. The current political situation is worrisome. I mean, China's rise and their authoritarianism and Russia's authoritarianism and even authoritarian instincts in the US concern me a lot. Hopefully they will not win out. And hopefully climate change will be somewhat mitigated. And I'm hoping it's by technological advances. I don't have much trust that we're going to be able to curb our energy usage terribly through just willpower. But so hopefully there will be technical advances that allow us to do that before we turn out to be Mad Max situation.
Could you be with somebody who is not vegan?
Could I have a partner that is not vegan? I could at first. It might be inconvenient, but I think I could. I know a lot of dedicated activists that are with partners that aren't vegan. I can understand why someone wouldn't be vegan. Like if someone who doesn't care about animals, now that would be different. If you don't value animals, it's like, why would you even be interested in being a partner with me? I mean, I'm not dedicating my life to earning money. I'm dedicating it and having vacations. I'm dedicating it to helping animals. And so what interest would someone have if they don't share that? So I don't think it's something I need to worry about, because that's just not going to happen.
How do you stay positive in a sick world?
I don't think the world's nearly as sick as most people think. I think humans have progressed a great deal. We've made great strides in terms of all sorts of issues. I feel like when I look at human history and human civilization, things have just progressed as I would have predicted they progress. The climate change I would not have predicted. I would never have thought, well, building up carbon in the atmosphere is going to be this huge problem. That's like, who would have even thought of that? But it is. But other than that, it just seems like there's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and every issue gets pushed back, and then it goes a little bit more forward. You know, there's issues. There's, you know, the cost of housing is a big problem, but that's probably going to be solved at some point, I hope. Artificial intelligence is like, that's a predictable problem that needs to be solved, and it could be a big problem. Some people much smarter than me worry about it, and other people much smarter than me think it's nothing to worry about. And I do follow the arguments, and I think it's definitely something to not dismiss. So that could be a problem, artificial intelligence, but it's very predictable. Now what happens with it, I guess I can't.
Effective altruism, isn't AI kind of?
Yeah, that's a big concern of theirs.
I thought that was maybe something that we're striving for, because if we can obtain that, it solves a lot of the, like, if we become more non-human, then we don't really need to exploit animals.
I don't know what EA's position is on artificial intelligence in general. I mean, I know that there are people, effective altruists, who are very concerned about the long-term implications of artificial intelligence and whether it could get out of control.
I think you also surround yourself with like-minded people. I think that probably helps, right?
You know, in terms of animal activism, sure, yeah.
That's probably a significant part, because you've surrounded yourself with like-minded people since the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, well, I work with activists, but you know, I do play, as I mentioned to you, I play pickleball, and so I'm out with, and I've developed a lot of friendships with people who play pickleball. Very few of them are vegan. Actually, a couple of them are, so that's surprising. But I'm in Florida, so a lot of them are fishermen. They like to go fish for fun, and that is something that I have a hard time identifying with. But I've been fine with it. I've been fine with the fact that they don't see the world exactly the way I do, and I've still been able to be nice and even develop friendships with them. I don't see the world as there's evil people and there's good people, and the good people want this future utopian world, and the good people are stopping us from having it. Well, it's like I was talking about how I don't like there to be anything negative happening in society, like any sort of war, any sort of catastrophe. Like I don't have any feeling like God is punishing us by anything. I'm pretty much an atheist, so that doesn't even make sense to me. But I think even among a lot of atheists, they like to see humanity punished for its excesses. Now, this may be just a subconscious thing that I feel like people have, and maybe I'm wrong. Especially in climate change, I get the feeling that people who are very...
Or zoonotic diseases.
Zoonotic diseases, pro-climate change, feel like that is punishment for our consumerism, and I don't feel that way. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with consumerism in and of itself. Its impacts maybe could be mitigated if we care enough to do it, but consumerism in itself, it doesn't matter to me. Like, if you don't take away the overt negative impacts, then I don't have a problem with it. If we had a lot of landfill space to throw all our crap in as we get done with it, I don't see a problem with that. Now, you displace animals when you do that. That could be an issue, and that would be something that would bother me. But in general, I don't, so I guess that's what I'm saying is a lot of progressives see things inherently as a problem, and I don't see it inherently. I just see some of the impacts of it as what the problem is. And if we can get rid of those impacts, then I don't have any problem with it.
Yeah, because like some of my issues with not eating whole food plants, those whole food plants, you can get a scooper and scoop your beans into your bag. There's no processing, no packaging. You can take the greens and put them in your bag. These are things that don't require invasive processes and resources. So I feel like really the more whole food plant-based, the more you're actualizing your veganism in a sense. That's just my take on it. Do you ever feel that way?
I try not to add things to veganism that just isn't using animal products, because I think that gets too contentious. Like to say, well, a vegan wouldn't do this or a vegan wouldn't be in favor of that. I don't think we should do that.
But what about when somebody's vegan and they're really sloppy?
And what are you going to do? We got a lot of representations of veganism that the average person wouldn't be impressed with. The sloppy people might go vegan because another sloppy person is vegan, so you don't know. I
get a lot of comments and they're critical. They're very ad hominem, shallow, critical comments, and they're not looking at, oh, well, there's plenty of these other vegans that don't look this way. So they'll look at one and they'll overgeneralize it. There's constantly that. But I guess we really need to pick the lower hanging fruit.
Yeah, I mean, trying to cater our activism towards online trolls, not the best group to do it with. I mostly just, I'm on Twitter a little bit. I tweet out when I have a new article. But if one of these pro-carnivore people starts saying stuff, I just ignore it. I mean, they're just...
You're not afraid you're giving them a platform?
There's not enough time.
Because one comment,
I mean, first of all, they don't even make any sense.
A lot of people might see that, and it might influence a lot.
I mean, if there was something intelligent to respond to, I will. But I generally try not to argue too much on social media, because you don't. If I do, it is for the onlookers. It's not to win an argument. I don't worry about the paleo promoters. You just can't worry about them. Like that, they don't have the same values as we do. I'm worried about helping people who care about animals and want to do something about it and want to go vegan. The problem is that you've got vegans saying the vegan diet's the most healthy diet, and you've got paleo dieters saying the paleo diet's the most healthy diet. And so there's this clash, and it's not even that interesting of an argument to me. Like I don't even think either side is right or wrong. It's just, it doesn't matter. Because I just want to help the people that don't want to support animal agriculture. Here's how you can do it. And if you love animal agriculture, then whatever.
That's great, man. I'm glad to hear that, because I needed to hear that.
I mean, I've been thinking this way for a long time, so I don't, but I do see online the other vegans getting very upset about what the paleo trollers are saying, and it's like, don't waste your energy, sadly.
What kind of foods do you eat? What are your daily staples or things you try to get in your...
If I don't have to rush out in the morning, I will eat oatmeal for my morning breakfast. Oatmeal with walnuts, raisins, generally a banana. If I have to get out of here quickly, I will eat something more processed as a light breakfast. I tend to eat dinner late, so I'm usually not all that hungry in the morning, so I gotta be kind of hanging out here to actually eat a full breakfast. But I generally eat an orange a day, an apple a day, a couple cups of cooked kale per day with sunflower seeds on them. Almost every day I eat that. I will drink carrot juice or eat carrots every day. I will usually have pasta every day just because I like it, not because I think you need to eat pasta every day. You certainly don't need to. I will try to eat beans for lunch, either refried beans like nachos, or I've found these packaged beans and bean salads, and I'll often put that on pasta to eat. So I try to have actually whole legumes for a meal, so that I'm not just eating vegan meats. Yeah, that's probably what I eat on most days. And then I just fill it in with bagels and peanut butter. I often will eat if I'm got to get out of here faster.
Dr. Furman says eating a bagel is as bad as eating the chicken breast.
Something happens to me, you'll be able to say it was the bagels. I hope nothing happens to me because it's going to be the B12. It's going to be I ate too much calcium. I took too many zinc supplements. Too much pasta. Not enough pasta. No one's gonna argue I didn't eat enough pasta.
EPA.
That too, but no one. I will say this: no one's gonna argue that I didn't eat enough pasta, and that can go on my gravestone. Did not eat too little pasta for sure.
What are your favorite mock meats?
Gardine's burgers probably, and the tofurkey sausage, which Trader Joe's used to carry, but they don't anymore. I haven't seen the tofurkey sausages anywhere lately. That's really disappointing, but I loved the tofurkey Italian sausage. They were 29 grams of protein per serving, so it was a huge amount of protein. And I used to eat one of those every day, but I can't get them around here.
I like filled roast. You ever have that?
I do like field roast. It's a little on the pricey side for me.
Oh, yeah, I don't get it. I rarely get stuff like that.
The tofurkey sausages at Trader Joe's were very affordable. Tofurkey lunch meats, I eat a decent, some.
So you're not afraid of these mock meats at all, like on an occasion? Even though they might have a lot of saturated fat or sodium or something, or you try to stay away from those?
Do they have a lot of saturated fat? I don't know that they have a lot.
Some of them might. I don't know. I think maybe the more the Impossible or the...
I mean, I eat Earth Balance on my toasted bread because I'm not that worried about having, I don't feel like you need to have a cholesterol level exceptionally low. I don't worry too much about that. Like I don't want to have a cholesterol level 250, but I also think 175 is fine.
Salt, oil, sugar, try to limit those or anything? Or...
Oh yeah, I try to limit sugar for sure, but I'm very active exercise-wise, and so I don't feel like I need to limit sugar as much as someone else maybe should that's not active. You know, I drink Gatorade while I play pickleball, that's sugar. Salt, it depends on your blood pressure. I mean, if you have high blood pressure, I would limit salt as a general rule. I have low blood pressure, and people with low blood pressure don't need to worry too much about salt, but I don't eat much of it. It's in the processed foods I eat, but I never add salt to something. I just don't need salt. So that really is an individual thing, I think. When I measured mine, the last time it was 1,500 milligrams, which isn't too bad.
You're not really too fearful of the salt, oil, sugar. You're not a no SOS guy.
I'm less worried about oil than sugar. I think eating a little bit of sugar is fine, and the more active you are, the more sugar you can eat. But if you're someone who's not active and you have a tendency towards metabolic disease, I think sugar is more important to cut out than oil.
You don't really get into fasting or anything like that?
I don't get into fasting, no. I find fasting very unpleasant. I don't think the research is necessarily supportive of the idea that fasting is better than not fasting, so I don't see, well, why do it?
How do we make sense of the totality of evidence when there's so much misinformation out there? How do we really make sense of this? And do we even need to, I guess?
We probably don't need to. I mean, what I come across, I should say, a lot of people that care way more about nutrition than I do. A lot of times people write me and they're very worried about something. They're not having a problem, but they're like, well, what do I do about this and this and this? And my response is not to cavalierly say it, but is to say nicely in so many words, you're too worried about this. You know, you're stressing yourself out and you don't need to be. Kind of like what we hit on earlier a bit. Like, I don't think you need to stress out about every little detail about nutrition. So I would just say cover the bases. You don't need to win an argument with a meat eater. That was a poster for a long time in our movement, how to win an argument with a meat eater, and had all these facts from Diet for New America. I don't think we're trying to win an argument with a meat eater. Don't have an argument with a meat eater. A lot of people don't know I'm at pickleball, don't know I'm vegan, don't know I'm a nutritionist, and I'm privy to a lot of conversations on nutrition by people that clearly don't know what they're talking about, and I don't feel a need to butt in and say, hey, I happen to know the nutrition research and I want to set you guys straight. I don't care. What does it matter to me if they have this idea of nutrition that I think is wrong? So I just don't feel like we need to have the argument. If someone asks me my opinion, then I will give it. I'm usually glad they don't ask my opinion at those times. I don't think we're trying to win arguments.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. But if somebody was curious and really wanted to have, because it just feels good to say, here's this, and
yeah,
right.
And
I mean, usually I'll say something like, well, the American College of Cardiology, the American Heart Association, all these leading health organizations, the American Nutrition and Dietetics Association, whatever, and even the National Academy of Science and Medicine seem to be supporting this. Like the Institute of Medicine says increased fiber, decreased saturated fat. They show an acceptable macronutrient distribution range higher in the low end of carbs than fat and protein is on the high end. Everything to me is pointing in this direction, but people, they'll get hung up on some influencer that's all working out and eating steaks every day. And so it's like, I guess you're saying, don't worry about it, man.
No, I mean, my idea is try to appeal to people about animals. If they care about animals, then let's try to help people who care about animals go vegan. But I'm not interested in winning an argument with someone who doesn't care about animals. I mean, there's no way to win that argument. If someone says, I'm fine with animals being suffering and being slaughtered, that's the end of the conversation for me. Who cares? I mean, at that point, it's like, we have such different views on this subject that there's no point. And I'm not saying that, like, if I had a personal relationship with someone and they were that way, then over time I might talk to them more about animals and, well, why don't you care about the suffering of animals? But in a exchange on Twitter or on Facebook, you can't say anything to make someone change their mind about that. It's just, we're having totally two different ways of looking at the world. And then my hope is that over time, our way of looking at the world, which, as I mentioned before, I think is the odder way at this point in history, I hope will win out, and that we will eventually be the much more common way of looking at the world. And I think the effective altruism movement is some evidence of that, in that you get all these effective altruists who, now some people come to effective altruism because they first cared about animals, but a lot of people came to animal rights because they first cared about effective altruism. So you get a lot of people who want to do the most good. That's their purpose of being here on Earth, or at least that's how they frame their purpose. And then they think, well, we have to consider animals. And so they're considering animals, whereas previous generations would have been like, we don't care about animals. So I think it's a good sign that so many people in the effective altruist movement consider animal suffering when they didn't necessarily have relationships with animals. I think most of the animal rights movement is driven by people who have had relationships with animals, like they've had a dog that they loved and they wouldn't want to see that dog suffer, and they can say, well, my dog was no different than these other animals. And so that's driving most animal rights activism. But to see that there's people who just care about ethics and that they consider animals in their ethical scheme, it's people who care so much about it. That's, I think, a very good sign for the future of society moving away from eating animals.
Have you ever been into a concentrated animal feeding operation?
Yes, I have. I have been in chicken and duck farms, actually, inside the warehouses. And then I've been, in terms of pigs, I've been to university campuses that had a simulated, so it would be like not as big, but on a smaller scale, but the cages are the same. So I've been outside of slaughterhouses where animals were being slaughtered, and you could get the idea of what was going on because it was so horrible. The pigs make a lot of noise at slaughterhouses, at least in my experience at this. So yeah, I've seen that.
Was that early on? Do you think that kind of fueled your fire?
No, it wasn't early on. It was after I had become an activist. I one time was with a friend of mine in a part of town in Cincinnati, and he pointed out, I think there might have been a pile of the leather, like the skins. He said, oh, that's a slaughterhouse. And I got very, very creepy feelings. I mean, I just felt like it was a horrible feeling to know that they were killing animals right in this building. That made an impact on me, but it was years later before I went vegan. I think I was in high school, like I said, so it was probably 3 or 4 years later.
But it could have been a seed, right? For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was the first time I realized, oh, there's somewhere where animals are killed for food. But I didn't think about it much after that.
Some people recommend taking their children to at least an animal sanctuary so they can meet the
animals.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that's a great thing to do, I think.
Well, you got any last minute encouraging words to wrap this up?
Encouraging words is that we've made a lot of progress, and it's slower than we want. It's always going to be slower than we want, but we're headed, I think, in the right direction. So I think there are good signs. I think we have every reason to have not expected veganism to grow as much as it has. And we should be happy that it seems to be going in the right direction.
Man, this is an extreme honor. You have been very instrumental, I'm sure, in countless people's lives, moving in this direction. And you've been very helpful for me, having a resource. I want to encourage anybody watching this to check out veganhealth.org, veganoutreach.org, and get involved. And I'm sure there's plenty of opportunities for people to get involved, right?
If they can help with our vegan chef challenges in their city if they're interested, that's one thing. It does take a commitment, like I said, but anyone who wants to donate, I mean, we do need donations. Donations have been down lately because the stock market has been down in the last 8 months. So this is a good time. We have a May matching campaign. Oh, this might not even be on before May, but whenever it's on,
you got campaigns.
Funding we definitely need to keep our programs going.
How many employees you got in all?
In the United States, we have about 15, and in India, we have about 10. We have some big programs going on in India.
A lot of expenses.
It does take a lot of time and effort to run programs in 50 different countries, and even if they're online, it takes a lot of time and effort. So
what you're doing is amazing, I think.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks a lot.
I appreciate it, and it's an honor.
Thank you. All right.